Hello one and all to Vision Denial and World Watch. My name is Sam, and as per usual with the different format, we are going to now evaluate and review the LCK Summer Playoff and Regional Qualifier. They were the first region to get the first qualifying team as well as the last qualifying team, sandwiching in together an interesting approach to the qualification process. Just as a forefront to everything, the LCK had their playoffs on patch 14.16, as well as their regional qualifier on the same patch. There is no changes to the LCK format going forward after this or anything else. This has been the tried and true statement and formula for them for a long time now. There has been some interesting shakeups, as well as for lack of a better term, there's no golden road this year, so that means no team will be able to do the full sweep and gauntlet of everything. And quite honestly, I think this was the playoff. This is one of the weaker LCK playoffs / regional qualifiers that we've had. So let's take a look over everything. Also, if you're interested as to these reviews and how they've happened, all of them I post on TikTok as soon as I finish watching the actual best of fives, and you can see the link of that down below. Those will also be included and being done during the Worlds process, which I'll be able to do in a much more lively fashion. So without further ado, let's go over and review the LCK best of fives. Let's go. Confidence is a huge difference maker in these kinds of series. Now, Foxes over here has a team show us some decent coordination, some strong early game presence, and an understanding of their win conditions. But as a team, those things only work out when the confidence is in full displays, which it rarely was. Their proactivity, coordination, ballooning of leads, all of it bound to the confidence in their own play, which kind of just didn't exist for most games outside of Game 3, and even then. And while they do have regionals as a last-ditch effort for Worlds qualification, I have strong doubts that they'll be able to do so, at least in their current state. Now, Dplus, for their part, continue their legacy of early-game titans and late-game flubs, strong coordination, really good neutral approaches, and a lot of proactivity, things that we know from them, until the late game comes around. They either end their games quick or drag them on for far too long, and that has always been a concern of mine with this team. But their improvement is noted from spring and even from previous iterations. And I can see a momentum doing wonders for this squad, especially when it comes to trying to cinch a third, second, or first seed. My MVP for this series is Moham for how he initiated and created space in these skirmishes. This was the LCK Round 1 of playoffs. BNK FearX versus Dplus Kia. The telecom wars are always an emotional roller coaster. KT demonstrate a solid approach to their early neutrals, some great coordination and individual skill expression, and balloon leads fairly solidly, honestly. But their lack of adaptability between games mixed with some proactivity issues meant that they leave their opponents to dictate so much of the game's pace. While there is a chance still for them to make Worlds, their consistent proactivity needs a lot more work. T1, for their part, are relentlessly proactive with a lot of adaptability and coordination and a solid eye for their win conditions. But we still have their strange approach to drafting in ways that make their approach to winning any games harder than it needs to be, and some individual micro errors that halt any of their ballooning that usually would be fairly solid. I'm hoping to see that some of this gets polished if they really want one of the 3 remaining LCK slots for Worlds. My MVP for this series is Zeus, who took matters into his own hands this whole series. This was round 1 of the LCK, KT Rolsters versus T1. There is something sinister about how much control was displayed by Gen.G. Try as they may, Dplus really played their hearts out. From solid coordination and understanding of their win conditions, they have strong proactive play and understand how to punish and operate around their opponent's win conditions. But they're just a little too slow in this series, to the point where they never really controlled the pace of the game, and this is honestly more of a testament to Gen.G than to Dplus's faults. The only fault really to note would be their lack of adaptability from game to game. And now, as far as Gen.G is concerned, their MSI title, and by extent being first to qualify for Worlds, is well reflected within this series. While there are minor hiccups with their microplay, their overall macro approach, coordination, neutrals, vision, so on and so forth, this is one of the scarier teams that qualified, and what I would qualify as a for sure top 8 team. But I want to hold my breath for any further predictions, because this is expected out of Gen.G. It's only a matter of if they keep it up and how cleanly they can do it, because this wasn't the cleanest series for now. My MVP of the series is Pays, whose macro and skirmishing influence was all-encompassing. This was the LCK's Round 2 upper bracket, Dplus Kia versus Gen.G.
There seems to be a little bit of confusion with the priorities these teams have this series. Now, T1 continued to be absolutely bizarre. They have some great coordination, good sense of their win conditions, some decent proactivity. This team is fine by all means. And I would usually say they are Worlds contenders, but there is still this issue of how they draft and play against their opponents. Their playstyle doesn't ever match their compositions, and they make their lives harder than needed with some of them. Hanwha Life, for their part, shows some incredible coordination, very strong early game approach, and solid neutral setups. To me, seeing this team constantly turn skirmishes around in their favor is a strong strength. But they'll often trade in awkward ways around the map during macro trades, and they tend to struggle to close out games. For me, I want to see them get a little more efficient regarding this, but as they are now, a pretty strong contender for a world slot from the LCK. My MVP of the series is Peanut, who enabled his team's win conditions beautifully. This was the LCK's second round upper bracket, T1 versus Hanwha Life Esports. Some really shocking turns in this series. Hanwha Life continued their string of impressive series so far, from strong early game approach, solid ballooning, great coordination, stuff that we continue to know from them, which includes some bizarre macro trades and struggles to closing out games. This particular problem will bite them in the future, to the point where I'm not even sure they'll make it to the finals of the LCK, but I'm pretty certain they'll still cinch a slot for Worlds. Gen.G, for their part, weren't as clean as I'd hope here. They still show some of the strongest late game play, incredible macro approach, and super coordination, but they'll either over-index or over-commit on some plays early in, play overzealous and slow down the pace of the game, or just straight up play in a constant fight mode while playing behind. But that's just the thing. Hanwha Life matched their pace and approach for the early game, so we got to see Gen.G play from behind, and it's serviceable. We'll just have to see if they ever get put in that position again and how cleanly they can adapt from then on. My MVP for the series is Pace, who was playing like a freaking madman. Oh boy. This was the third round of the LCK in the upper bracket, Hanwha Life Esports versus Gen.G. Sometimes I'm kind of baffled by the decisions that T1 make. Dplus are a team I expect to either get the third or fourth slot in the LCK World slot, but will need to do so in the regionals. They have some strong early game proactivity, solid coordination, great adaptation, and frankly, just a more consistent team. But they're still a little slow, letting their opponents dictate the pace, and for it, giving a lot of opportunities that slide from them to come back or even establish leads. T1 continued their string of frustrations on my part, as we witnessed some of the highest highs they have to give. Some great vision play, solid macro approaches, ridiculous coordination, and ballooning of leads, oh my. My issue is that the range of expected quality of play from them is just too big and way too inconsistent out of T1. Add that to some frankly strange drafts and propensity for over-aggression, and they become very easy to punish. So we'll have to see which version of T1 shows up during the rematch and qualifier against Hanwha Life. My MVP for the series is Zeus, who was dancing circles around Dplus. This was round 2 in the lower bracket, Dplus Kia versus T1. Congrats to Hanwha Life Esports on being the 17th team to qualify for Worlds. I expect T1 to qualify next for their LCK slot,
The macro approach, coordination, and sheer aggression that they use usually pulls through in these kinds of qualifiers. Now that said, there's clearly too much confidence in their ability to outplay with high concepts and high skill compositions that they make their lives harder by default. A simpler draft would help them not just play from behind, but actually play to their strengths. Hanwha Life recognized this perfectly and stuck to their very simple drafts that solidly countered the approach T1 wanted. On top of being very controlled, calculated, holding the pace and tempo, all while having strong coordination with neutral approach and just solid fundamentals, Hanwha Lives are a real Worlds contender. Although there are some signs of hesitancy and micro errors that have me concerned when it comes to the international stage, but that a little bit of polish will do them a lot of good in that particular area. My MVP for the series is Delight, who was everywhere, making T1's life all so much harder. This was the semifinals in the lower bracket of the LCK and a rematch, T1 versus Hanwha Life Esports. This year's Golden Road is dead. Gen.G have not been as solid as I'd hope, and the series really showed this particular issue and nailed their particular dominance inside of a coffin to die. They still manage incredible coordination and macro approach on top of ballooning leads and closing out games. It's just that the biggest thing here is that Gen.G aren't usually put behind like this against a team that can match them. And it doesn't bode well for their run on the international stage when many of the other teams that are going to be able to keep up and put them behind in this fashion. And as such, they'll need to actually polish that part of their play. They can play from ahead nicely, just as fine, right? It just being put behind needs work. While Hanwha Life have a massive improvements over this particular playoff. They already had some of the strongest early games, excellent neutrals, fantastic coordination, and frankly, an incredible approach to their win conditions. Some of their bizarre macro issues and hesitancy has mostly gone away here, and this time fully reading into any of Gen.G's plays. I still find it creeping here and there, but given the rate of improvement they've shown, I can say that this is a force to be reckoned with. Both of these teams, for sure, are top 8 teams. My MVP for this series is Viper for how much dominance and accuracy he has had in these skirmishes. This was the grand finals of the LCK and a rematch, Gen.G versus Hanwha Life Esports. Congrats to Dplus Kia on being the 19th team to qualify for Worlds. T1 really needs to get it together. They have moments of solid coordination, macro approaches, understanding of their win conditions, and overall a generally scary team at their cleanest. But we barely saw this time in this series. Their over-aggression mixed in with a lot of cockiness and unwillingness to adapt to either simpler drafts or around their success that Dplus had is baffling. They have one last chance to make Worlds, but oh boy. Now, Dplus for their part aren't much better in this series. They have their calm, cool, collected nature is not from a sense of control, but of timidness and fear, which is a shame because you could tell that with time they got more confidence and speed, but those are warm-up games at that point, and well, they're not great. They are well coordinated, especially around neutrals, and understand how to close out games well enough, but honestly, neither of these teams inspire confidence whatsoever, and the series as a whole left a lingering chaotic taste on my mouth that I just didn't like. My MVP for the series is Moham, who got sick of the pace of the games and decided to take things into his own hands. This was round 1 of the upper bracket of the Regional Qualifiers and a rematch, T1 versus Dplus Kia. You can't just roll over like that. I'm not impressed by how this series played out, really. BNK as a team hasn't shown much to talk about within this series. They work well around neutrals and have some understanding around how to punish their opponents, but we regularly find them committing so many micro errors, misunderstanding their own win conditions, and frankly being way too passive for a team that regularly drafts these very aggro compositions. KT Rolsters, on their part, did just the bare minimum to pass by. The scoreline says that it was a stomp, but letting yourself fall behind that much 3 games in a row only to get back from regularly punishing your opponents and only playing aggro once you get back to either even or a lead is not a confident sign towards being Worlds contenders, let alone Worlds qualification. Now that said, the coordination, proactivity, and understanding of their win conditions were there. It's just a matter if they can get past their over-aggression and put it in check or find themselves falling behind to the pace of the game. My MVP for this series is BDD, who did everything to keep control of the tempo for his team. This was round 1 of the lower bracket of the regional qualifier of the LCK. FearX BNK, or BNK FearX versus KT Rolsters. Congrats to T1 on being the last team to qualify for Worlds. KT almost making it is a bit of a tragedy, as improvements were being seen within the series. From more measured proactivity to stronger macro approach and far less over-aggression, but unfortunately it's too little too late, as micro errors and strange priorities really caught up to them, not to mention the still persistent warm-up games in and of themselves. Being one game down doesn't help you at all. From T1, similar frustrations come up. Why don't they play like this from the start? They still manage some strange drafting, but it is clear that with the simpler drafts they play, more of their strong macro and neutral approaches shines, and their coordination and vision outclasses their opponents. My biggest concern here is that T1 at their apex shows a strong, even possibly top 8 team, while their lowest is more like a middle of the pack team. And this consistency issue is why they struggle to qualify in situations that everyone expected them to do so in their last series. My MVP for this series is Gumayusi, who was the most consistent member of this squad, and a pretty scary one at that. This was round 2 of the regional qualifiers of the LCK, KT Rolsters versus T1. Also, a rematch of the Telecom Wars. And there we have it. We have our 4 representatives for the LCK. In first, Hanwha Life Esports, upsetting and really shocking many people outside of the usual script we are used to getting from them, where they usually just solidly land in third. But honestly, the improvement is so excellent and solid that, fuck it, it's worth commending. Gen.G, who qualified from MSI and yet lost their throne through complacency and a little bit of overconfidence. Dplus Kia, who barely got their shit together and really needs to step up their game going forward. And T1, who everyone expected to get any one of these top 3 slots and just barely got the 4th one. With many question marks, especially with their ability to defend their title going into Worlds. A couple of things to note. This is the most consistent team. I expect them to make top 8, but their highest highs do not meet my expectations of a top 4 team going forward. They're generally understandable they're like generally qualified for most of the standard regiment of League of Legends. Vision, neutral objectives, understanding their win conditions, moving forward in terms of everything you want out of a solid team. This is the bar. They are the bar. Gen.G, for their part, it really depends on how much they go through things. My concerns from them at MSI being a very lackluster international team still applies here. MSI was a very good sign, but given how they played during this playoff, I'm afraid they might return course to how they usually play during their international tenure. Their highest highs are definitely within a top 4 caliber, but as they are now, top 8 is the expectation, and I'm still unsure if they will actually meet that. They should, but that only really depends if they lose the complacency that they had. Dplus, top 8 is contentious at best for me. They are within the bar of the top half of the ladder. How well they go, I have yet to evaluate the statistics and evaluate through that means. But as far as their playoff performance goes, it has been a little bit underwhelming. They are consistent. They've gotten a lot better than what their older curses were, which was a strong early game, very uneventful late game, if not completely throwing the late game. And this has been less of that particular issue. There is a great solid approach to ballooning leads. There's a solid approach to just generally closing out games, as well as the understanding the win conditions in a way that is just more than the early game in general. So my concerns about their lackluster approach is that they're not completely gone. They're just replaced with the pacing being much slower. They've opted into, instead of playing their early game breakneck pace, to more measured approach. And then T1 is honestly just T1. At their highest high, they're more than just the top 4 team. They are finalist contenders in general. And this has been true for T1 for forever. But they regularly and consistently over prioritize complicated drafts that on paper, and literally only on paper, do better than everything else that other teams would be able to do, and when they execute, they show their prowess immensely. But frankly, the whole they're not doing it. They're really not executing on it with what seems to be a bit of a lag, so to speak. And I don't know if this is because this particular squad has had more teams around them adapt and get better and actually catch up to their shenanigans, or if they straight up don't fully... They're like too tunnel visioned on the actual complication of their picks to understand why it is not working in the moment and why the simpler drafts seem to give them more success, because when they have a simpler draft, you can understand where there's like how scary this team is generally. In fact, their highest highs I think would outpace everyone, and given their track record in international play, it would not shock me that they make top 8, but I'm having seeds of doubt that they'll likely never get to that point. And so if you're not evaluating them on past tenure in international stages, currently making top 8 is dicey at best. But those are my thoughts regarding the LCK, who tend to have a lot more of a robust league, but this year the quality didn't seem to be on par with past years. And that is a little bit concerning just for the future of this league, as well as prospects of whether or not this is going to be an LCK championship year, or if the LPL is going to be able to sneak it given the actual quality of their teams that they're sending in. But we have yet to see from there. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below for anything and everything, your favorite best of 5. How well do you think that the LCK is going to do? Do you think they're going to get dethroned this year, or they're going to get another chance to win another title for the region, or if somehow T1 will continue to break their record, or Gen.G will get a 3rd title? Get another team that doesn't... to have more than 2 titles. Any and all of your thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. In the coming week and a half-ish, you should see a breakdown video of all the teams, as well as where I think they will place overall in the tournament, and my logicale, and an overall view of things to expect. But until then, have a good one. I'll see you then. Bye.